My name is Hannah, and this is my beauty budget. My no-buy year gave me a lot of time and space away from buying stuff to think about what it means to buy stuff. By the end of 2018, I had become acutely aware that when I buy an object, I don't just get an object. I also fund the projects of the companies that make and sell the object. So this year, as best I can, I'm educating myself about those projects. And in this video, I'm going to talk about exactly where my beauty budget went in January and share what I've learned about the behaviors of the companies that are now in control of that money. I've said this several times before, but I just want to make it clear again here that my mission this year is not to avoid buying from unethical companies. It's just a fact-finding mission. I'm carefully staying within the confines of my budget, but in terms of how and where I spend that money, I'm shopping with the same abandon I have always had. I'm just going back then later and paying really close attention to where the money went. And I'm not only reading about the companies, I'm also doing a lot of reading about corporate responsibility in general, and I'm doing a lot of reading about the efficacy of individual activism. There's a lot that I don't know about how this part of the world works, and there's a lot that I don't know about the philosophical concept of ethics to begin with. What is ethical? Who decides what's ethical? I have some understanding of ethics just from having lived in the world, but there's a lot more that I can learn. So instead of striking out into the future with grand pronouncements about what I will and won't buy and what makes a company ethical or unethical, I'm taking this time to find out what is going on. I have many, many more questions than I have answers. Lots of questions about the companies and lots of questions about my own behaviors and my own ethics. My observation is that it can make some people uncomfortable to dwell in the gray area or to see other people dwelling in the gray area. So I am warning you right now that this video is one big gray area. Gray area is my middle name. Hannah Gray Area Louise Poston. I am 100% living the questions right now and hoping that I might one day live my way to the answers, as Rainer Maria Rilke says. Personally, it makes me kind of uncomfortable to see a move away from more complex thinking and towards black and white thinking, which is something that I have observed both on YouTube and in my society at large right now. I think there's a lot of power and goodness in admitting that we don't know some things for sure. So let's all take a deep breath, open our minds, get curious, loosen our collective grip on perfectionism, and let's go ahead and get into the meat of the video. I'm going to switch back and forth between reading the information to you and talking about it and showing my spreadsheet on the screen. If you haven't watched my video about how I'm compiling this information and you want to know more about that, the link to that video will be up in the cards right now. And in that video, I explain everything about my spreadsheets, so I'm not going to repeat myself in this video. So let's start by looking at the spreadsheet. I will throw it up on the screen right now, and you will see that on the left side, there is a column that lists out all of the companies that I'm looking into. Those are all the companies from which I have purchased something over the past 2 months. So there are some companies there in the list that we're not going to talk about today because those are companies from which I purchased something in February, and today we're just talking about the January budget. So the first company on my list that's from January is Amazon, and what a one to start with. Amazon got $6.30 of my budget in January, and I had done some reading about Amazon before. I was aware of some of the scandalous headlines about Amazon that have been in the news. I am generally interested in corporate responsibility, so it's not like this is the first time that I had read anything about them, but gosh, what a one with which to start the video. My notes say mistreatment of both blue and white collar workers, so most of what I had read before had to do with the terrible warehouse conditions for people who pack things at Amazon warehouses to ship them off. But when I started researching, I found a lot of reports about people who work office jobs at Amazon, people who work higher up in the Amazon system, also having a really bad time. Truly terrible warehouse conditions and compensation for packers and delivery drivers. Intense monopolization of its markets. This is another thing that comes up if you start researching Amazon. The question of whether it's ethical to monopolize the market so intensively, and a lot of economists have done pieces of writing about this, taking issue just with how incredibly enormous Amazon is. I'm not an economist and I'm not going to go into detail about that. I just wrote it in the notes, and I'll leave linked down below any relevant articles that I can find. And then I also wrote that I feel like Amazon promotes thoughtless buying by making it so easy. So there's just a question of whether the tactics and the structure of the company are supporting a healthy lifestyle, in a sense, for the people who are purchasing things from Amazon. We talk about how convenient it is, how easy it has made our modern life to be able to buy something from Amazon Prime. I think that that's a double-edged sword, so I put that in the notes. So let's look back at the spreadsheet. When it comes to the checkboxes, Amazon did very poorly in the green section. I only checked one box that's green. It's the box for charitable giving. Apparently, the Amazon corporation does do a good amount of charitable giving. I think that they have a program on Amazon whereby people who are buying stuff from Amazon can opt in to donate a small amount. There's definitely a charitable giving aspect to what Amazon does, so I checked that box. I did hover over product inclusivity and diversity in advertising for Amazon, because obviously you can find anything on the site and you also see different kinds of people widely represented on the site when you're looking through it. But I felt like those questions were almost not applicable to Amazon, because there's product inclusivity and advertising diversity on the site simply because of the nature of the site. It's not something that the company has taken pains to do. So I left those two sections blank, and Amazon got away with only one green checkbox. Over in the red section, however, Amazon is well endowed. They have 5 red X's. Amazon is a mega corporation. Amazon is 1% owned. I believe that the owner of Amazon is either one of the richest or the richest person in America or in the world. In any case, he's very rich. And I checked the X for unchecked ecological impact. And the reason that I gave Amazon an X for unchecked ecological impact, it really just comes from my own experience. It just comes from the fact that the nature of the system, the way that Amazon has transformed e-commerce, means that cardboard boxes and plastic packaging just pile up in our house in a way that it never would have if it hadn't been for Amazon and what Amazon has done to that industry. Amazon definitely gets the box checked for employee mistreatment. And then I also checked anything else bad on the radar, pretty much because of the market monopolization issue, but also just because I turned up so much stuff, so much nasty stuff when I started researching Amazon, that I felt like it was fair to check anything else bad on the radar, because there are things that came up that are bad that aren't in my list. So Amazon has 1 good mark and 5 bad marks and 0 question marks. It was pretty easy to find out the answers to all of my questions about Amazon just with some internet searches. Next on my list is ARITZIA. ARITZIA is a Canadian clothing company, and I only spent $8.17 at ARITZIA in January of my budget because I had a gift card and I just spent a tiny bit more than the gift card amount, and so I ended up paying the difference, $8.17. ARITZIA was really interesting to research because there's conflicting information. One thing I really like about ARITZIA is that there's a lot of information on their website about ethics. They are obviously aware of all of these questions. They are obviously making an effort in several realms. But after I continued on past their website with my research, it became unclear to me whether they are making a good effort to be ethical or just making a pretty decent effort to appear ethical. Either way, if you're interested in ethics when it comes to clothing manufacture, I recommend looking at ARITZIA's website and reading what they have to say about corporate responsibility responsibility, because however true their claims are, they do a pretty good job of outlining what it would look like for a company to be transparent and ethical when it comes to supply chain, manufacturing, stuff like that. So ARITZIA is a member of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, a group of apparel manufacturers who are making strides in this realm. They talk a lot on their website about trying with regards to environmental and humanitarian issues. And they do give a good amount of information about the way that they keep their supply chain clean. Meaning when they buy some fabric, for example, they might be buying the fabric from a good source, but they're also checking to make sure that that source didn't use child labor in harvesting the cotton that they used to make that fabric. That's what supply chain is talking about. So on their website, ARITZIA appears to be very serious about supply chain transparency. And it's obvious that it's something that they think about and something that they do have policies in place. They are making an effort. But when I continued to do some research about ARITZIA and I looked them up, I think it was on the app Good On You, which is specifically about finding out if the clothing that you're buying was ethically manufactured. ARITZIA's grade on that platform is not good enough. And the claim seems to be that there's not enough evidence to support what they say that they are doing. So it's like they're trying, but they're not trying so hard, and they're not being so clear that they can be considered gold star in terms of ethics. I appreciate that, and I believe that it's true. But I also see that they're making much more of an effort than a lot of the other companies that I looked into. And I don't think that what's on their website is just for show. I think that they're doing some. And some is really good right now from what I was able to discern. ARITZIA also donates to a variety of nonprofits that support women specifically, which I think is cool. They also collaborate with artists on their packaging, which I think is cool. One huge strike against ARITZIA is that, as far as I can tell, they only go up to a size 12. So they have completely failed in the inclusivity department when it comes to sizing. They've done a really good job in diversity of advertising, racial diversity. There's a beautiful array of different types of people represented on their website, but size diversity, not good. And ARITZIA was also started and owned by a Canadian guy who was clearly born into the 1%. So it's like money from money from money. Those are all of my notes about ARITZIA. Let's look back at the spreadsheet. So in the checkboxes department, ARITZIA has done pretty well. I gave them a check for eco-conscious manufacturing. I gave them a check for humane manufacturing. I gave them a check for ethically sourced materials. I gave them a checkbox for diversity in advertising, and they also got a checkbox for charitable giving. And I gave them a checkbox for the question of whether there's anything else cool on the radar, because I really like the fact that they are collaborating with artists and supporting artists on their packaging. ARITZIA only got 2 red boxes checked, but they do have a lot of question marks in the red section. So they got a check for being 1% owned, and they got a check for being non-inclusive with their products. The question of whether they're made in sweatshops, whether there is employee mistreatment at ARITZIA, those are 2 question marks, because what I read indicated that even though they're making an effort, it could be that somewhere buried in the supply chain there's a sweatshop or there is child labor or something like that. It seems like they're making an effort, but it's not for sure, so I put those question marks there. And then I also left a question mark for ARITZIA under the fast fashion column. I don't think that ARITZIA is fast fashion in the way that a company like Forever 21 is, where they're releasing new stuff into their store every week, every 2 weeks, overproducing, selling things for $1, just dumping stuff into the landfill. ARITZIA doesn't quite do that, but I also wasn't convinced after all of the reading that I did that their business model and that their production model isn't at least a cousin to the fast fashion industry. I just don't know. So tallying it all up, ARITZIA ends up with 6 good marks, 2 bad marks, and 3 question marks. And I'm going to keep an eye on them. I'm going to see if I can find out more as the year continues on. I feel like they put on a good show, especially compared to a lot of other clothing brands in terms of what they're trying to do, but in some ways the jury is still out. All right, the next brand I want to talk about is ASUTRA. And I didn't even really know that I had purchased something from this brand, because this is the brand that made my sleep mask, my eye mask that I bought from Amazon at the very end of the month last month. It's a black silk eye mask that's filled with buckwheat and lavender, and it is amazing. I actually really love that thing, and I'm probably going to put it in my favorites at the end of this month because it has improved my quality of life significantly. Concretely, I really, really love it. But I bought it from Amazon because I was just comparison shopping, I was looking around, and I ended up feeling like it was probably the best made. It had really good reviews, and I went ahead and bought it, but it was shipped through Amazon, and I didn't really research the company until I went to put them into this spreadsheet, and I discovered that they're amazing. So the total amount of my budget that went to this company, ASUTRA, last month was $14.44. That's a little bit less than how much I paid for the sleep mask, but 15% of what I paid went to Amazon. It turns out that ASUTRA is a small independent beauty company that I had never heard of. Most of their products are vegan. They're all ethically made in the United States. They have a really strong emphasis on using organic ingredients, and it says on their website that everything is carefully and ethically sourced. And apparently ASUTRA just started selling some of their products at CVS, so you might be able to access them that way if you don't want to buy from Amazon, although we haven't yet gotten to CVS in this video, and I think that the markup is probably a lot higher at CVS. So if you buy from ASUTRA at CVS, ASUTRA is probably only getting half of what you spend, whereas if you buy from Amazon, ASUTRA is getting 85% of what you spend. The best option would be to buy directly from their website, which I will link down below. Anyway, those are my notes on ASUTRA. If you're interested, I definitely recommend checking out their website because it is beautiful and there's a lot of information of this nature on that site. Let's go ahead and look at their checkbox record on the spreadsheet. ASUTRA did phenomenally well when it comes to the checkboxes on my chart. They are independently owned, the first indie brand we've had so far. They are woman-owned, so they got a checkbox in the minority-owned column. They are eco-conscious, both in the packaging and manufacturing departments. They utilize humane manufacturing. They use ethically sourced materials. They have product inclusivity. They have diversity in advertising on their website, and they do some charitable giving. I had to dig a bit on their website to find it, but it's definitely there. So they got 6 green checkboxes, knocked it out of the park. And then when it comes to the red section, ASUTRA garnered 0 red checkboxes. I did put a question mark under the question of whether they are 1% owned, because there's just not enough information out there about the owner of this company to be able to tell whether the person who started the company was already exorbitantly wealthy or whether it was a humbler entrepreneurial effort. Adding it all together, ASUTRA got 6 green checkboxes, 0 red, and 1 yellow question mark. All right, let's talk about CERAVE. They're the ones who are next on the list. This was really interesting because CERAVE, they are so beloved on beauty YouTube because they're so happily recommended by dermatologists. And so I have this ethical feeling about CERAVE. Also, they're an affordable brand. So when I think about recommending CERAVE or I think about the products, I think, yeah, good on me, good on us, CERAVE. Yeah, it's so humble, it's so authentic. I just have all of these feelings attached to the brand. So it was really interesting to look it up and discover that it's owned by L'Oreal, which I didn't know. And the original parent company of CERAVE was Valiant, which is one of those pharmaceutical companies that was in the news for artificially inflating the prices of life-saving drugs purely for profit. And there is an article about this, which I will link down below. It's from the New York Times, and it was a whole thing. I'm not going to go on at length about that, but there was this scandal, I think it was a couple of years ago, when it just started coming out in the news. People started doing intense reporting about this really unethical thing that pharmaceutical companies were doing. And it was the poorest of the poor who were feeling the impacts of those actions. So when that was happening, I'm not sure if Valeant owned CERAVE then, because I don't know when they sold to L'Oreal, but when you just dig a couple of layers back into the history of the brand, you find this. CERAVE is also phasing out animal-derived ingredients. That's something that I found when I looked them up. I believe that if you buy anything from CERAVE in Europe right now, already they are vegan. Some of the formulations that are being sold in the United States aren't completely vegan yet, but it's definitely something that they're trying to do. So this was the first one where I had to take into account both the company itself and the parent company. And here we get into a little bit of sticky town when it comes to ethics, because I think that the question of whether you consider a company's parent company to dictate its ethics, or whether you feel like you can separate the way that the inner company behaves from the way that the parent company behaves, I feel like that's a matter of opinion. So in order to fill out the spreadsheet, I had to reckon with my own feelings about this. And I felt like I was filling out the spreadsheet for L'Oreal. I just felt like I couldn't try to find out what CERAVE specifically does. I felt like I was just researching L'Oreal. I feel like it's one big company, and again, I don't know all there is to know about any of this. I'm not presuming to know all there is to know, but I discovered in myself when it came time to do this that my personal ethics have a hard time separating the two things out. So a lot of what I ended up doing when it came to filling out the checkboxes had to do with what I was able to find about the parent company. So I gave them question marks for humane manufacturing and ethically sourced materials. It is difficult, if not impossible, to find out how cosmetics are manufactured, what it's like inside the factories. There's a lot of information about the manufacturing process of clothing because fast fashion is a hot topic. So a lot of clothing companies have had to expose, or have reluctantly had exposed, the ins and outs of their labor practices, but not so when it comes to cosmetics. I just could not find anything about whether or not CERAVE is humanely manufactured. So I left a big question mark there. I gave them a checkbox for product inclusivity because they are so well known for being really good for sensitive skin, and I feel like when skincare is what you're manufacturing, that constitutes inclusivity. And I gave them a checkbox for charitable giving because L'Oreal has a bunch of programs through which they give back. So they ended up with 2 green checkboxes and some question marks. Over in the red section, CERAVE got a checkbox for being a mega corporation, a checkbox for being 1% owned, a checkbox for unchecked ecological impact. There is some information on the L'Oreal website about trying to be ecologically something, but it's almost as if their silence speaks volumes. Like you can just tell that they're not really trying, and they're maybe making a nod to it, or maybe starting to think about how bad it's going to look when people start talking more about the ecological impact of plastic packaging, for example. But at this point, despite the paucity of information, I don't feel uncomfortable associating unchecked ecological impact with L'Oreal. And then 2 more question marks in this section. There's the question of whether or not these products are manufactured in anything that resembles a sweatshop, and there's a question of whether there might be some other kind of employee mistreatment going on in the supply chain in terms of how the products are made, how the materials are sourced, etc. And then I also gave them an X in the column for anything else bad on the radar because of having formerly been owned by Valeant Pharmaceutical. So beloved CERAVE ended up with 2 good marks, 4 bad marks, and 4 question marks. Let's talk about CLARISONIC. CLARISONIC is next on my list, and they received $14.73 of my budget last month. The only thing that I found that I felt was worth noting in a separate note other than the checkboxes is that CLARISONIC used to be manufactured in the United States, but they recently decided to outsource all of their manufacturing. So they shut down their plant, they laid off 120 people, and they are now entirely made in China. CLARISONIC didn't do super well in the checkboxes department. They got one green checkbox for charitable giving because they do have a charitable giving program. And then over in the red department, we have some checks and we have some questions. So they got a checkbox for being 1% owned. They got a checkbox for selling in China. I didn't give them a checkbox for being a mega corporation because even though it's a giant company, I don't really consider CLARISONIC to be a mega corporation in that way. I don't have any definition of mega corporation, and this is where my wishy-washy fuzzy thinking really is being revealed, but I just feel like L'Oreal is a mega corporation and CLARISONIC's a really big company and a successful company, but I did give them a checkbox for being 1% owned. So I don't know whether CLARISONIC's made in sweatshops. They're manufactured in China, but that was all of the information that I could find on that. And I also don't know whether or not they actually test on animals or whether they're just being sold in China and therefore are still not considered cruelty-free. I don't know if they themselves have animal testing labs. So they got a question mark for testing on animals and they got an Xbox for selling in China. I mean, not an Xbox, like they didn't receive an Xbox as a gift so that they could play video games, but they got an X in the cells in China box. And you know what? I'm going to give them an X for something else bad on the radar because they just laid off all of those people. So they're ending up with 1 good mark, 3 bad marks, and 2 question marks. ColourPop is up next. This was really interesting. I knew some stuff about ColourPop, but I didn't know that much about ColourPop. I didn't really know about the context of the company, who started it, how it unfolded, etc. I learned a lot. So ColourPop got $13 of my money last month. My notes say ColourPop was started by a brother-sister duo, but it's not exactly indie. ColourPop is owned by Seed Beauty, which is a parent company, a conglomerate that is an offshoot of the 2 founders' father's company, Spatz Labs. So they were born into the business of running beauty labs and they basically decided to innovate from there. And when I talk about people like being born into the business or being born into money, it's not like I have something against that or a company being 1% owned. It totally makes sense that they would grow up as the children of someone who owns a beauty lab and then start a cosmetics company from that context. I'm not saying that that's morally wrong or that that's ethically bad or something. I just feel like it's worth noting when even an independent company is a case of the rich getting richer, as opposed to somebody talented and hardworking striking out on their own with a great idea and turning it into something big. And I feel like ColourPop is amazing in a lot of ways, but in terms of ownership and in terms of where it came from, it's definitely a case of the rich getting richer. Seed Beauty, which is the parent company that the brother-sister duo started, Seed Beauty owns KKW Beauty and Kylie Cosmetics as well. And the founder, one of the founders, the sister, was literally quoted as having said that they started ColourPop because there was an opportunity to bring a fast fashion model to beauty. And I will leave the article linked down below in which she's quoted as having said that. So those are my notes about ColourPop. Let's look at the spreadsheet. They got some green check marks going on here. I gave them a check for humane manufacturing. I gave them a check for product inclusivity, and I gave them a check for diversity in advertising. I gave them a question mark for ethically sourced materials because there was nothing on the ColourPop website that I could find about how they source their materials. And they talk a lot about how everything's made in their labs in the United States and it's made humanely. And they talk about how they use the best materials, but they don't talk about where the materials come from. So I left a question mark there. partly because I know that there is specifically a question about the ethics of mica. There's mica in a lot of cosmetics, and a lot of mica is mined using child labor. And I can't find, by searching on the internet, anything that talks about whether or not ColourPop takes pains to use ethically sourced mica. And I guess I feel like if they did take pains to use ethically sourced mica, it would probably say that on their website. So there's a question mark for me about whether their materials are ethically sourced. Over in the red section, they have a check mark for being 1% owned. Once again, it's the check mark that indicates that their company is a case of the rich getting richer. And then I gave them a check mark for fast fashion. Even though it's not a fashion company, I feel like they're embracing the fast fashion model and everything that that implies. So ColourPop ended up with 3 good marks, 3 bad marks, and 1 question mark. I did want to quickly address here, because I feel like it's particularly germane to ColourPop, that I don't have a column in the green section for a brand to be cruelty-free. I did include the question of whether or not a company tests on animals. I put it in the red section. So tests on animals is one of the columns that a company can get an X for doing. And then I also have another section about whether a company sells in China, because I feel like some companies actually test on animals, whereas some companies allow the government of China to test their products on animals. And I wanted to distinguish between those two things. I wanted to know if some companies do both, and some companies only do one, and some companies only do the other. So that's the section in which I'm addressing the question of animal testing. And ColourPop didn't get an X in either of those columns. It makes sense to me that testing on animals is either something that you do or that you don't do. It didn't make as much sense for me to say that not testing on animals is something that you do, if that makes sense. I hope that that's clear. And if it's not clear and you need me to explain it further, like in another video or something, just let me know. We can talk about it. That's just why there's no column for cruelty-free, because I wanted the spreadsheet to have more subtlety than that. All right, let's talk about CVS. So CVS got $8.99 of my money in January, and a lot of bad stuff came up when I started researching CVS. It just seems like the CVS employees and executives have been embroiled in a number of controversies and scandals, prescription errors, to discrimination, to bribery of politicians, to bad business practices, etc. There's just a lot of bad business following around the name of CVS. So that's what I wrote in the notes. It seems to have been just one thing after the other when it comes to the ethics of CVS. When it comes to the spreadsheet, they got 2 green X's, one for product inclusivity and one for diversity in advertising. And none of the other potential green X's got checked for CVS. In the red department, they got a check for being a mega corporation. They got a check for being 1% owned. They got a check for unchecked ecological impact. They got a check for employee mistreatment. And they also got a check for the question of whether there is anything else bad on the radar, because a whole bunch of stuff came up. It just seems like CVS is chugging along, trying to make as much money as possible, being minimally conscientious. And that's sort of where the story ends. Next up is eBay. So eBay got $4.40 of my budget in January because I bought a $44 pair of sneakers, and eBay takes 10% of that sale. My notes say that eBay owns PayPal and part of Skype, along with a bunch of other stuff. So it's a bigger corporation than just eBay. It's a mega corporation. And I also noted that I like the fact that eBay promotes reselling and the reuse of used stuff. So I'm a huge proponent of reusing, using secondhand things, reselling. I feel like for me, in my personal code of ethics, reusing, acquiring secondhand things is one of the most ethical things that you can do. So for me, there's something about eBay and what it promotes. And I know that lots of things are sold on eBay that aren't secondhand, but there's something about the ethos of it that I feel good about when I look at my entire spectrum of ethics when it comes to consumerism. So I thought that that was worth noting. All right, let's look at the spreadsheet. I gave eBay an X for the question of whether or not something is secondhand. And that's partly because the sneakers that I bought were secondhand. I also think that I pretty much only will ever buy stuff from eBay that's secondhand. So I think that that X in the secondhand column is going to apply throughout the year because that's what I go to eBay for. So I feel like even though the corporation itself isn't secondhand in terms of what, I mean, it's kind of hard. It's like weird to project the way in which the question of whether or not something is secondhand can apply to an entire website or to an entire corporation. But for me, with my experience with eBay, with the way that I use eBay, I feel like they deserve a check mark in that column. I also gave eBay a check mark for being eco-conscious. Now, this is interesting, and I did go around and around about this because there's also a red check mark that's available for unchecked ecological impact. And I did give Amazon a red check mark for unchecked ecological impact just because so much stuff gets sent through the mail from Amazon. And I was like, well, should eBay get unchecked ecological impact as well? Because a lot of stuff gets sent through the mail as well because of eBay. And I decided against it. I decided that the ecological implications of encouraging people to buy and use secondhand items for me is more important and more noteworthy than the fact that a lot of packages are being sent in the mail. And I feel like there's a difference between individual people around the world packing things up to send them to other individual people. There's a difference between that and a mega corporation shipping out millions and millions of cardboard boxes all the time, which is what I see Amazon doing. So maybe my wits are failing me, or maybe I am being really too fuzzy with the numbers here, but I feel comfortable checking the eco-conscious box for eBay because of how much they promote reusing secondhand things. And I also didn't give them the unchecked ecological impact checkbox because of that same question. eBay also got the charitable giving checkmark. They have a pretty robust charitable giving program. And over in the red department, they got the mega corporation check and the 1% owned check. So eBay ended up with 3 green boxes checked, 2 red boxes checked, and no question marks. But I did find out that the owner of eBay is famously reclusive. Did you guys know that? Okay, and actually this is very relevant. The next one that I have on the list is individual. And I put this on here to represent the person from whom I bought the secondhand sneakers. So I bought this pair of sneakers from someone on eBay, and that person received $39.56 of my January budget. This to me is the most ethical kind of shopping. I'm really glad that I was able to put that money into the hands of an individual person who probably really needs it. And the item that I bought was secondhand. I saved it from the landfill. And I also gave this person the checkmark of independently owned because their business on eBay, whether it's a real business or just them reselling stuff, that's an independently undertaking. And then individual didn't get any other checkboxes. I'll show you the spreadsheet, but they ended up with 2 good marks, 0 bad marks, and 0 question marks because really none of the other questions apply. Next on the list is L'Oreal, and we addressed L'Oreal already a little bit because CERAVE is owned by L'Oreal. My notes for L'Oreal say L'Oreal is considered to be highly ethical in terms of business practices. That's right. It was so funny when I started looking up L'Oreal. It was like, L'Oreal's so ethical. L'Oreal has won awards for being super ethical. But then when I looked into that, what they were talking about was the ethics of the way that business is conducted, like how they spend their money and how they invest and how they treat each other inside of it. It had nothing to do with any of the questions on my list, really. So it's funny, I found out that mega corporations have a different definition of corporate ethics, I guess. They have this reputation of being ethical, but it's not covering manufacturing conditions, ingredient supply chain, etc. There's so little information on manufacturing when it comes to L'Oreal, and when I looked them up through some other sources, other websites, other people who are rating cosmetics companies in terms of environmental friendliness, their rating was a solid D. I forgot to say that L'Oreal got $4.50 of my budget last month. Let's look at the spreadsheet. So I gave them a question mark for humane manufacturing because there's just no information. I gave them a question mark for ethically sourced materials, again, no information. And then they got check marks for product inclusivity, diversity in advertising, and charitable giving. Over in the red department, mega corporation, check, 1% owned, check, unchecked ecological impact, check, question marks for whether or not they're made in sweatshops and whether or not there's further employee mistreatment. And then they also got a checkbox because they sell in China. It was very clear from my research that L'Oreal does not test on animals in their labs any longer. They used to do, and they don't anymore. So they don't have cruelty-free status in the cruelty-free community as far as I can tell, simply because they continue to sell in China. So L'Oreal ended up with 3 green check marks, 4 bad check marks, and 4 question marks. So there's a lot of bad stuff and a lot of mystery surrounding L'Oreal. And Maybelline, which is next on the list, this is so funny, but literally everything is the same with Maybelline as it is with L'Oreal. Maybelline got $4.50 of my budget in January, and all of the checkboxes and the question marks and everything are the same. Maybelline also has 3 good marks, 4 bad marks, and 4 question marks, and it's for all the same reasons. Next up on the list is NYCHE. So NYCHE received $13.50 of my budget in January. NYCHE is owned by L'Oreal, but it was founded by a woman of color who was also an immigrant to the United States, which I think is really cool. It used to be manufactured entirely in the United States, but now NYCHE is all manufactured in Taiwan. So NYCHE is owned by L'Oreal, but there are some differences between what NYCHE has going on in the checkbox section and what L'Oreal has going on. A conspicuous difference is that NYCHE doesn't sell in China. So NYCHE doesn't test on animals or sell in China, and therefore NYCHE has cruelty-free status among most people who keep track of these things. I assume that there are people out there who don't consider NYCHE to be cruelty-free because it's owned by L'Oreal, but again, the question of whether or not something's cruelty-free isn't really part of my spreadsheet. I honestly don't feel like it's my place to say whether something is cruelty-free or isn't. I feel like what I can say is whether or not they test on animals and whether or not they sell in China, and NYCHE doesn't do either of those things. So NYCHE has a question mark for humane manufacturing, a question mark for ethically sourced materials, a question mark for made in sweatshops, and a question mark for employee mistreatment. Just like the other cosmetics companies, it's just hard to find information about the ethics of cosmetics manufacturing. So there are those 4 question marks, but they have green boxes checked for product inclusivity, diversity in advertising, charitable giving, and then they have a checkbox for the question of whether there's anything else cool on the radar, which I checked because of what I uncovered about the woman who founded NYCHE. Over in the red section, mega corporation, check, 1% owned, check, and unchecked ecological impact, check. I just realized that I skipped one. I skipped this little company called Niche Designs. This was a super weird experience given that I was right in the middle of researching all of these companies. So Niche Designs is the company from which I purchased the sheet suspenders, those straps that go underneath the mattress and keep the sheet, the fitted sheet, from popping off the bed. And I bought them from Amazon. Niche Designs received $10.19 of my budget, and I could uncover absolutely nothing about this brand. It's a mysterious Amazon seller. They have a website. Niche Designs has a website, but when you go to the website and you click on like contact, about, info, nothing comes up. It just reroutes you to the front page of the website. There was just nothing. It's like question marks across the board. I can't tell if it's independently owned, minority owned, humane manufacturing. I couldn't even find out where the product had been manufactured, where it had shipped from, anything. So Niche Designs has a bunch of question marks, 0 good marks, and 0 bad marks. Okay, we're closing in on it. I feel like bananas right now. I'm like is anyone still watching? Is this the most boring video ever? My throat is raw. I just feel kind of miserable, actually. This is kind of a miserable slog, partly just because it's so depressing. I feel powerless. I feel terrified that I'm going to be attacked by animal rights activists in the comments. Let's move on. The next one up is Sephora. So Sephora received a measly $14.73 of my budget in January. And I say measly because I spent so much money on Sephora in previous years, even during my no-buy year, but not this year. Sephora is owned by LVMH, which is a French luxury conglomerate. And Sephora has made some effort at making their stores more eco-friendly. So I did dig up some things about how they changed the display cases and what they're made out of, and they're reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. They're making some effort and they've received some praise for that. But after doing more poking around, I decided that they haven't made enough of an effort at eco-friendliness to merit me checking the box for eco-friendliness for Sephora. I just thought it was worth mentioning in the comments section about that. So looking at the spreadsheet, in the green checkbox section, Sephora gets a check for diversity in advertising and a check for charitable giving. And then over in the red section, Sephora gets a checkbox for being a mega corporation or being owned by a mega corporation. They get a check for being 1% owned. And then I put a question mark under the column that says made in sweatshops, because I looked up the Sephora collection and I couldn't find any information about where it's manufactured and whether or not it's ethically manufactured. So I feel that there's a question of how and where Sephora manufactures the cosmetics that it sells under its house line. And then Sephora also sells in China. There are Sephora stores in China, and the Sephora collection, of course, is also sold in China. So Sephora ended up with 2 green checkboxes, 3 red marks, and 1 question mark. All right, and then the last company from which I bought anything in January was Timeless Skincare. Luckily, we can end off on a really beautiful one. So the total amount that I spent at Timeless was $21.85. And my notes say that there is only 1 animal-derived ingredient in all of Timeless's products. So they use emu oil in their eye cream, but everything else on their website is vegan. And they are an amazing company with a woman of color as the CEO. I was full of joy at everything that I uncovered about Timeless Skincare. Let's look at the spreadsheet. So Timeless is independently owned. They were founded, I believe, by a man, and his wife is the CEO. And it seemed like Timeless was co-founded by the 2 of them, but then his name comes up when you try to find out who owns Timeless. And I couldn't find a picture of him. I don't know his ethnicity. So his wife is a woman of color, and I saw some pictures of her, but I didn't check the minority owned box because it appears that Timeless Skincare might be owned by this man and he might be a white man. So I don't know whether it is minority owned or not, but I do know that the CEO is a woman of color. So that's pretty cool. And I definitely checked the box for anything else cool on the radar because of that. Timeless is very eco-conscious with their packaging and their manufacturing. They're manufactured here in California. Humane manufacturing for sure. Ethically sourced materials. They're very clear about this on their website. Product inclusivity for sure. Diversity in advertising, absolutely. They have a beautiful website. And they also engage in charitable giving. They have no checkboxes in the red section and no question marks, except for, I guess, the question of who owns Timeless and what he looks like. He's very mysterious. There's no pictures of him on the internet, but I didn't feel like I was left to wonder about the ethics of the ownership of the company, so I didn't put a question mark in that box. Timeless has 8 good marks, 0 bad marks, and 0 question marks. Effing amazing. It was really interesting to compile all of this information and see ASUTRA and Timeless, these 2 skincare companies, 2 beauty brands, who are really clear on their website about the ethics of their production and about the way that they source their materials, just jump off the page with glowing records. As I said at the beginning of this video, my project this year isn't to make sure that I only purchase from ethical companies, obviously, as is clear from the information that I just presented, But having garnered the information, having gone through it, I'm so motivated to purchase again from ASUTRA and from Timeless. I don't know what will happen in the future in terms of what I buy and what I decide not to buy, and whether I will make any of those decisions based on this chart. Right now, I'm motivated to not buy a lot of things so that I don't have to go through this so intensively every month. This was hard. This is garbage. It's hard. I don't wish I weren't doing it. I'm glad that I'm doing it. It's good for me in so many ways. I mean, it's really, really, really good. But this is the most miserable video I've ever filmed, because it just, the information, looking the information in the face, not just the check marks, the good and the bad, but the question marks, how much I failed to uncover. It's depressing, and it's hard not to have access to this information and not to be able to use the information to make decisions. I think in order to thoroughly and completely fill out this checkbox sheet, I would have to be an expert. I would have to devote my life to it. The information just isn't really readily available to consumers. I feel like I was able to get a general picture of things, and if I just look at the numbers quickly, I can see that, you know, $60 to $80 of my budget went to independently owned brands, for example. So I can kind of get a general sense. We are going to write some codes that cause this spreadsheet to spit those statistics out totally clearly and tally them up as the year goes on. As of now, I don't have all of those percentages, but I do have a general sense. I can kind of see what's going on. And now I have all this information in my head about all of these brands, and I will continue to do more research as I continue to buy more things. So thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. Right now, I feel simultaneously like this was a lot and that this video might be kind of hefty and kind of boring. And I also feel like I'm sorry I couldn't do more. I'm sorry I don't know more. I'm sorry I wasn't able to organize the information in a more cohesive way. And I am motivated to keep working on organizing it and keep working on delivering more information. This is where I'm at right now. I just wanted to check in with you guys. This is what I've managed to learn, what I've managed to gather, and I've done my sloppy best to get the information organized in some kind of way that allows me to get some kind of grip on where my dollars have been going and what my dollars have been doing. Thank you again so much for watching, and don't forget to take extra good care of yourself this week so that you can be the most effective version of yourself as you do your work in the world. What do you think of my outfit?
It's very, like, nice to meet you, Susie Q.
Not me, no,